Hello everyone. In this video, we will be dealing with a postmodern age writer of British literature, that is Kingsley Amis. In the previous videos, we have already discussed about some other writers who belong to this particular age and literature, and I will add the link in the description. So about Amis, he was born in the year 1922 and died in the year 1995. He is very important from a literary point of view and also from a net point of view because he is regarded to be one of the greatest writers of the 1950s, or we can say he is regarded to be the most famed writers of the postmodern age. So, about Kingsley Amis. So, Kingsley Amis, in his very first novel, Lucky Jim, he created a comic character that became a household word, a very common household word in the Great Britain in the 1950s. So, just like his heroes, Kingsley Amis was also a very common figure in the households of Great Britain. And he can also be regarded as a representative of a group called the Movement, which sometimes was called as the Movement. And we know that the poets who belong to this movements, they wrote understated or disciplined verses, which without any experimentations or without any grandiose themes. So, Kingsley Amis, he belongs to the group called the Movement, and he also belongs to the group called the Angry Young Man. Okay, with his characters like Lucky Jim and some other characters, you can find that many critics, they also credit him to be an angry young man, and we will discuss that later in this video. So about Kingsley Amis, 1922 to 1995. So now let's look into him in much details. So Kingsley Amis, he is an English novelist, a poet, a critic and a teacher. So he is many things molded into one. He was an English novelist, he was a poet, he was a critic and he was a teacher. So his education, it was interpreted by the World War II with his service as a lieutenant of the army. So, still he became a teacher, and his biography was also written. So, his biographer was Zachary Leader, and he called him as the finest English comic novelist of the second half of the 20th century. So, you have to remember that the biographer of Kingsley Amis is Zachary Leader, who regards Amis to be the finest English comic novelist of the second half of the 20th century. He is known for his satirical comedies. Okay, so the genre in which Kingsley Amis wrote his novels were satire. He is the father of the novelist Martin Amis. So, these are certain things that you have to remember regarding Kingsley Amis. And now let's look on what this angry young man is, because before you go through the novels and the characters written by Kingsley Amis, you have to understand what this angry young man is. So, Angry Young Man, it's a group of mostly working and middle class British playwrights and novelists who became prominent in the 1950s. Okay, so Angry Young Man, it's a group of mostly working and middle class British playwrights and novelists who became prominent in the 1950s. So, it's a group of writers, we can say group of playwrights, novelists, and it also became a group of characters that appeared in the works of these novelists and playwrights. So, it's a group of mostly working and middle class playwrights who became prominent in the 1950s, and the phrase was originally coined by the Royal Court Theatre's press officer in order to promote John Osborne's 1956 play Look Back in Anger. So, the term Angry Young Man was first coined by the Royal Court Theatre's press officer while doing a press conference in order to promote John Osborne's Look Back in Anger, because Jimmy Potter, the protagonist of Look Back in Anger, is regarded to be an angry young man. They express scorn and disaffection with the established socio-political order of the country. So, the major reason behind these scorn and disaffection is that these guys, they belong to the middle class family, but still they are educated, not from the very prominent or most famed Cambridge or Oxford universities, but still they have got university education, they are educated, and after their education they come directly to the society where they witness the truth that all the well settled positions are occupied by the well-born, are occupied by the upper class people or by the people who occupy the seats of Oxford or Cambridge university, so the highly prestigious universities, and they remain frustrated because they remain unemployed. Okay, with all these education, they have got two choices, either to remain unemployed or to do the menial job. So that is why they became extremely frustrated or dissatisfied with the society or the socio-politics of that time. So that's about the angry young man. So it's a new breed of intellectuals who were mostly of working class or of lower middle class origin. So these are not the people who belong to the extreme noble category or the extreme upper class aristocratic family. They shared an outspoken irreverence for the British class system, its traditional network of pedigreed families and the elitist Oxford and Cambridge universities, because the society that they see are occupied by all these people, the salaried jobs, the powered positions, all these are occupied by either the elite classes or by the or by the families who send their children to Oxford and Cambridge universities. Or in simple language, we can find that they are extremely frustrated with the nepotism that they find in the society. They showed an equally uninhibited disdain for the drabness of the post-war welfare state, and their writings frequently expressed raw anger and frustration as the post-war reforms failed to meet exalted aspirations for genuine change. So these guys, they are extremely frustrated with the world war because their youth, their childhood, all are affected by both the wars, and even after the war nothing was changing or nothing was ever going to change. So still the class system, it silently stood there, making them unemployed, making them frustrated, making them feel like useless. So they have got extreme disdain for the society. So the novels and plays, the novels and plays of this angry young man or the people like them, they typically feature a ruthless lower middle or working class male protagonist who views society with scorn and sardonic humor and may have conflicts with authority, but who is nevertheless preoccupied with the quest for upward mobility, because they personally wish for themselves to belong to an upper class, because that would settle all their problems. Okay, so being born in a middle class family, sending to a middle class university, so these are all hindrance for them to have this these all serve as an hindrance for their upward mobility. So they wanted this upward mobility, they wanted to be treated like them, but they were not. So they were extremely frustrated. So the characters, the novels the characters of the novelist and playwrights who belong to the angry young man, they were the spokesperson of these novelists and playwrights. For example, Jimmy Potter or Jim Austen, all these characters, they are examples of this angry young man who are extremely scornful, extremely frustrated with the politics and the socio-political conditions of society during that time. So some examples of the writers who belong to this genre are John Wayne, Kingsley Amis, John Osborne, John Brain, Alan Zilito and Arnold Wesker. The most notable writers who belong to this angry young man is John Osborne and Kingsley Amis, and other notable figures are John Brain, Alan Zilito and Arnold Wesker. So now let's look at the notable works written by Kingsley Amis. So in the notes section, I have given a detailed notes. For the students, there is a detailed note section regarding the characters, themes and the major motifs and symbols of the novels and the works written by Kingsley Amis. So here let's look on the notable works in brief. So first one, we have Lucky Jim. So Lucky Jim, it was published in the year 1954. So Lucky Jim, it was published in the year 1954. It was the debate novel written by Kingsley Amis. It was an immediate success and it is still regarded to be the most popular work written by Kingsley Amis. So the novel follows the exploits of the eponymous James Dixon, who is also called as Jim Dixon, a reluctant lecturer at an unnamed provincial English university. So this disgruntled hero, that is Jim Dixon or James Dixon, he is an example of an angry young man. So that is Lucky Jim, 1954. It follows the exploits of the eponymous character, that is James Dixon, who is also called as Jim Dixon, and he is a reluctant lecturer at the unnamed provincial English university. Jim Dixon is epitomized a newly important social group that had risen by the dint of scholarships from lower middle class and working class backgrounds, only to find the more comfortable perches still occupied by the well-born, which prompted the critics to group Amis with the angry young man who expressed similar social discontent. As I said earlier, this is one reason why Kingsley Amis is regarded to be an angry young man, or who belongs to this angry young man, because of this character called Jim. So here you can find that Jim is an example of an angry young man who is born into this middle class family or lower middle class family, and while he does all the things in order to get himself an education, and that to a university education, he finally realizes the truth that all the comfortable positions are occupied by the well-born, and finally there comes the frustration, there comes the helplessness, there comes the all sorts of depression. So Lucky Jim is a perfect example of this angry young man of 1950s. So there was a question from Lucky Jim in December 2019 exam. Which one of the following novels by Kingsley Amis represents its protagonist as an angry young man? Which one of the following novels by Kingsley Amis represents its protagonist as an angry young man? So now let's look at the options. I Like It Here, Lucky Jim, The Biographer's Mustache and The Great Man. So these are the options, and just from the previous slide we know the answer is Lucky Jim, because James Dixon or Jim Dixon, he is an example of an angry young man. So the correct answer is option 2, that is Lucky Jim. So now let's have a look on the other works written by Kingsley Amis. We have That Uncertain Feeling. So the Uncertain Feeling, it also has got an anti-hero who belongs to this angry young man movement. It was published in the year 1955 and it was adapted into a movie titled Only Two Can Play. So just remember that Uncertain Feeling, it also has a character who belongs to this, who is an example of angry young man. And it was published in the year 1955. It was adapted into a movie titled Only Two Can Play. Then we have I Like It Here, and I Like It Here is the, it's more like a travelogue. It's a travel details of Kingsley Amis to Portugal, where he went to Portugal to collect his award. So the memories are collected together in I Like It Here, 1958. Take a Girl Like You. It's a 1960 novel written by Kingsley MS. It concerns the frustrations of the morally dubious Patrick Standish, a 30-year-old teacher at a local private secondary school, and his attempts to seduce Jenny. So that is Take a Girl Like You, 1960. So in this novel also he speaks about the frustrations of a man during this postmodern age or during the post-war period. Then we have One Fat Englishman, 1963, The Green Man, 1969. So the Green Man, it's like three genres of novel in one. So The Green Man, it is a ghost story, it is a moral fable, and it is also a comic novel. So you have to remember that The Green Man, written by Kingsley MS, it's a three genres of novel in one. It's a ghost story, it's a moral fable, and it's also a comic novel. Then we have Jake's Thing, 1978, which is a satirical novel. Then we have Stanley and the Women, 1984. The All Devils, 1986. The Folks That Live on the Hill, 1990. So Kingsley MS, he went to write more than 40 books, including some 20 novels, many volumes of poetry. As I said earlier, he belongs to sometimes called the movement group, where their lines are much more understated and disciplined, not like the experimental or fragmented verses of a postmodern poets, and several collections of essays. His apparent lack of sympathy with his characters and his sharply satirical rendering of well-turned dialogue were complemented by his commonly public persona. So, one thing that you have to remember about the writings of Kingsley MS is that he has written novels, he has written poetry, he has written essays, and he has got a certain lack of sympathy with his characters. So, for example, if we look at the character of Jim Daxon, though we might feel a sympathy for him, or let's say he is an example of a victim, but the way in which he presents these characters, it makes us think that we cannot feel any sort of sympathy towards them, because they are just like extremely frustrated, extremely scornful characters. So his lack of sympathy with his characters and also the way in which he presents them, that is through satire, those two things actually complemented him in his writings. And as a poet, MS was a representative member of a group sometimes called as the Movement, whose poems began appearing in 1956 in the anthology New Lines. So poets belonging to this school wrote understated and disciplined words that avoided experimentation and grandiose themes. In 1990, MS was knighted and his memoirs were published in 1991. So that's all about Kingsley MS. So while you are learning Kingsley MS for your NET exam, remember you have to study the movements that he is associated with. Then you have to study his novels in detail, especially Lucky Jim. In the notes I have given, in our LMS platform, I have given the notes of Lucky Gems in detail. So you have to go through it, look at the characters, the themes, the motifs, the symbols, everything regarding Lucky Gem in detail. Okay, so that's all about him. Thank you.